Hey everybody, this is Chris Willard again with Elevate Group and want to welcome you to another installment of our Elevate Generosity series. We're glad you're joining us. Today we're going to try to answer another really important question as you're seeking to elevate generosity and stewardship and giving in your church. You're going to have to answer the question, are our staff and our leaders growing in their giving? A critically important question. Are your staff and leaders modeling for the rest of the congregation what generosity and stewardship really look like? Because it's critically important that they are, and not just the paid staff, the people that have a role on your team, but also those who are leading in your ministry in some sort of a ministry role, kind of serving in some noticeable or clear way. They've got to be out front of the rest of the congregation in modeling generosity and stewardship. Imagine this scenario, for example. Imagine you or your pastor preaches a really great sermon on generosity and stewardship. It's right out of the Bible. There's no manipulation or arm twisting. You might say it's right on the money, okay? And then a person goes to their small group, their life group, their adult Bible fellowship, their Sunday school class, whatever it might be in your church. And the leader says something like this, "Hey, how's everybody doing?" Well, somebody raises their hand and says, "Well, I'm doing fine, but I got to be honest with you. I really hate when pastors talk about generosity and stewardship." And then this person goes on to share how bummed out or how disappointed they were in your pastor's sermon about generosity and stewardship and giving. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. First of all, in a small group, in a Sunday school class, it's probably not wrong for that person to share their concern, to share their frustration, to share how they're feeling. Maybe in a previous church they got burned by another pastor. Maybe they just don't understand what the Bible says about generosity. So the problem is not when the person in the group shares that. Hey, I'm bummed out, or I don't like when the pastor talks about giving. The problem is when the leader of the class, the leader of the group says something like, "Yeah, I don't like it either." You might as well just close in prayer. You're done, right? What you need is for that leader to be able to say something like this. "Hey, listen, I'm glad you shared that, but what I've noticed is that when pastor talks about giving, when he talks about generosity or stewardship, it's not because of what he wants from us, it's because of what he wants for us. This is kind of a discipleship thing. It's not really a money thing." Well, all of a sudden that person might sit back and say, "Oh, okay, maybe I'll give our pastor a little bit more of an opportunity on this topic." The point here is that if that leader, that group leader in this case, isn't also on a journey of growing in generosity and stewardship and giving, he or she will never be able to help other people in that important journey as well. And that's because of this fundamental true truth, and it's that generous churches are led by generous leaders. You know, it's funny, in the church, a lot of things fall to leadership. If you're going to have a church that is a praying church, you're going to have a leadership team that prays. If you're going to have a church that is committed to reaching its neighbors with the gospel, your leaders are going to have to model that kind of behavior for the people in your church. And the same goes for generosity and stewardship. If you are going to have a truly generous church, one that is really characterized by biblical generosity and stewardship, it's going to start with the leaders. Generous churches are led by generous leaders. Pastor, ministry leader, you have to be on a journey of growing personally in generosity and stewardship if you can have any hope of the people in your church wanting to take that journey on their own as well. You got to be on that journey yourself. Pastors, as a result of needing to encourage leaders and ministry leaders, staff and ministry leaders in this area, I think it's important, we at Elevate Group think it's important that pastors have access to giving data. What do I mean by that? Well, how will you know if your staff and your leaders are giving or are growing in their giving if someone isn't actually looking at that giving data. Now, I understand that there are some pastors who would prefer not to specifically look at particular giving data, and I think there are some ways to work around that. You can have an administrator create for you a list without specific numbers, a list without numbers connected to particular names. But somebody in your church needs to be looking at the giving of the staff and the leaders in your church to be able to identify, is somebody stuck? Is somebody's giving really not demonstrating that they're growing in this area of generosity and stewardship? Because if they are stuck, you need to get unstuck. A number of years ago, my friend Gunnar Johnson, who was a stewardship pastor at a church in Texas, used to tell the story of talking to a woman on his team whose giving was clearly not where it needed to be. He knew how much she made because she worked for the church. He also knew that her husband had a sort of a nice job, and he could guess what intentional, thoughtful giving might have looked like, and of course they were well behind that. So without being accusing, without picking on her, during a conversation with her, he simply asked, "Hey, I think you know that we care about generosity and stewardship around here. Where are you on that? Can you just talk with me about where you are on giving?" And what the woman basically shared was that she and her husband were having conflict about this whole area of generosity and stewardship. She wanted to give more. Her husband wasn't really ready to do that. And so Gunnar simply said, "Hey, do you think the three of us could just sit down and talk? Maybe we could just talk this out." And they did. And so the point here is that his access to that information and his willingness to act on it in a pastoral way, not in a gotcha kind of where's the money sort of way, was what was required there. Why? Because generous churches are led by generous leaders. The goal, by the way, for your leaders, your staff, your ministry leaders, your group leaders, your Sunday school teachers, shouldn't necessarily be some fixed number or some set percentage. Rather, what you should be looking for is growth. You should be looking for intentionality. You should be looking for evidence that, man, this is a person who is really leaning into this idea of being a person who is committed to generosity and stewardship and giving. My view is, I think our view at Elevate Group is that it's less about the amount, it's less about the percentage, it's more about the heart. And what does the giving actually demonstrate? So a great suggestion, I think, is to make the question of generosity and stewardship and giving a part of your review process for all of your staff on an annual basis, a part of your year in or year out check-in with your leaders, your group leaders, your Sunday school teachers, your ministry leaders. And the question can simply be, listen, I think you know our church is committed to generosity and stewardship and giving. Talk with me about where you are on that journey. And having looked perhaps at some of the giving and having giving data and having a little bit of advanced information about where that person might be, you might be able to help them to take whatever their next appropriate step might be in generosity and stewardship. Bottom line is this: generous churches are led by generous leaders, and it's the job of church leaders to encourage others to follow them in generosity and stewardship. So pay attention to the way your leaders and your staff are living out this value of generosity and stewardship.